Let's get started, shall we? Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second um, training in our communication series. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Angelo oh my God, Atanasio. ¿Sabe lo que pasa? Hay un restaurante muy famoso aquí en Panamá que se llama Atanasio.
Ah, mira, bueno saberlo.
Y bueno, Angelo no me contó que es accionista y está viviendo en
Ojalá, ojalá.
Bueno. So, welcome, Angelo. Sorry, Lourdes, I'm going to give the introduction in English and then we'll switch over to Spanish. So, Angelo is here today to walk us through a brief guide to writing for a broad audience, which is an excellent follow-up to our last seminar with Alma, where we are focusing on how to communicate, how to synthesize our information and communicate it to decision makers. This is now how to synthesize the information and communicate to a broad audience. And I'm very, very happy that we can continue to count on the support and expertise of Angelo, who is a STEP fellow himself. He also is a journalist and editor with a solid background in international media. He was an editor and video producer for BBC News World and currently holds the position of deputy editor at Latinoamérica 21 L21. Throughout his career, he has been awarded the 2016 King of Spain Journalism Award and has received two honorable mentions in the Ortega and Gasset Award from El País. And as I mentioned, Angelo is collaborating with the IAI as a STEP fellow, and we are very, very happy to welcome him back to support the STEP cohorts again this year. Angelo, thank you for being with us. I pass the floor on to you.
Muchas gracias, Kim, y muchas gracias a todo el mundo. Muchos ya me conocéis y me habéis conocido en persona, así que vamos a hacer las presentaciones cortas. Como decía Kim, soy periodista desde hace alrededor de 15 años.
Introductions,
He trabajado
brief. I've
tanto
been a
como freelance,
journalist for
como,
around 15 years. I've
como
worked as a
en
freelance
redacciones y
journalist
desde hace
and
bastante años
also
pues me
in
desempeño como supervisor
editorial
de Latinoamérica
departments. And
21,
I'm
que es la
the
plataforma de
I've been
divulgación
working
del
at
contenido de
Latinoamérica
análisis de
21,
opinión
which
líder en la región.
provides analysis
Lo que
and
hacemos
opinions,
es
and we're leaders in the region.
editar y publicar
What we do
análisis
is
sobre
edit and
democracia, régimen
publish
institucional
analysis
y
on
desinformación y cambio
democracy,
climático y
institutional
biodiversidad
quality,
en nuestra web
misinformation,
en tres idiomas
biodiversity,
y
and climate
también
change on
lo
our web.
difundimos en
And
una
we
red
also
de alrededor de
disseminate this
25
information
medios
in a
más
network that
importantes
includes
de la
around
región y de cada
35
país.
media outlets from the
Para
region
los que digamos queréis
and
tener
in
alguna
each country
referencia,
as well.
trabajamos como The Conversation,
We
trabajamos exclusivamente o casi exclusivamente
work
con investigadores y académicos y no
almost
con periodistas, y
exclusively
con
with
Project
researchers
Unity,
and
que
not
es la otra plataforma, gran
journalists.
plataforma de
So we
referencia
work with
de divulgación
conversation
de
on the one
contenidos y
hand
de análisis.
and the other
Y,
platform
en
as
fin,
well that focuses on
dicho esto,
analysis and opinion.
digamos, estoy
Okay,
encantado de participar
I am
ya
very
este
happy to
taller.
be
Es
here
probable que
today
algunos
in
de
this workshop.
ustedes ya habrán escuchado
Some
algunas
of
de
you might already
las
have heard
recomendaciones
about
que les voy a
these
comentar. Es
recommendations that
posible,
I'm going
pero
to be
digamos,
sharing with
aquí no se
you.
trata de inventar la
That's
rueda.
possible, but
Además,
we're not trying to
me
reinvent the
sumo
wheel.
a las
And
excelentes
also,
recomendaciones que dio Alma la semana pasada.
I,
La verdad,
of course, echo the amazing
bueno,
recommendations
sea quien
made
sea
by Alma
el
last
público,
week.
esto es
And this
genérico,
means
esto
that
me parece,
whoever the
pero sea quien
public,
sea el público al
um,
cual nos
whoever the
dirigimos, hay
audience
unas
we
constantes que
have,
hay que tener en cuenta a
there
la
are
hora de
some
comunicar.
constants that we need to consider
Y por
every
eso, digamos,
time we
voy a
disseminate
empezar, voy a
this type of
compartir
information.
pantalla
Okay,
y
let's
así
begin.
comparto la presentación.
Let me just share my screen.
Me avisan si la ven bien.
Can you see my screen?
Okay, simplemente me pueden avisar o Kim o alguien si se
Oh,
ve bien toda
Kim,
la pantalla,
someone,
la
can you
presentación.
please let me know if the presentation is in full screen mode?
Perfect.
Perfecto. Muy bien, entonces vamos a empezar. Este taller
Great.
se llama Breve
Okay.
Guía para
This
Escribir
workshop
para
is
la Gran
called
Audiencia.
Brief Guide
¿Y
to
para qué
Writing
sirve?
for a
Para
Broad
hablar de la importancia
Audience.
del storytelling.
And it's
Es
important to talk
decir,
about the importance
este
of
taller va
storytelling.
fundamentalmente
This
para
workshop
lograr tres
will
objetivos,
help us
que
achieve
son
three
aprender algunas
objectives:
técnicas para
learning some
ordenar las ideas,
techniques to organize
escribir con
ideas,
facilidad,
to
pero sobre
write
todo
with
para
ease,
atrapar la
but
atención del
most of
lector
all, to
sin perder
catch
el
the reader's
significado.
attention without
Digamos, en esta ocasión
losing
vamos
scientific
a subrayar algunos elementos
backgrounds.
fundamentales a la hora
In
de
this
escribir
workshop,
un
we
artículo de
will
divulgación científica.
point to
Digamos,
some
los términos son
essential
casi intercambiables,
items when
casi,
we have
no es
to
lo mismo
write a
artículo de
scientific
opinión
article.
o artículo de divulgación,
Um,
pero por
there are some
facilidad de
similarities
comprensión, digamos, lo voy
among
a
the
usar
terms
como si fuera un ejemplo.
OPED and
Y
all
entonces, en
that.
este caso, es
They're not
importante, vamos
exactly
a
the
ver
same, but
las
they're
dos
similar. So
estrategias
today
para lograr
I will
estos
use
tres
them
objetivos
as
para
synonym.
poder
I
escribir
will
un
present
artículo
some
divulgativo
strategies
que
to
pueda
achieve
llegar
these
a
aims
un
so that you
público
can
no
write
especializado,
a dissemination
que no
piece
está acostumbrado a
to
leer cosas
target
científicas,
a
pero que sí está
non-specialist
interesado en
audience.
entender más
This
el campo
audience is interested
del
in
conocimiento del que él
better
pretende
understanding
aprender.
this field of
¿Y
knowledge
cuál
or your
es la
field
mejor
of
estrategia
knowledge.
para lograr estos tres
And which is the
objetivos?
best strategy
Es
to achieve
usar el
these three
storytelling, que es una
objectives?
palabra
Well,
que se ha vuelto
storytelling.
tan usada,
Storytelling
tan
is a
común y
term that
tan,
is now so
bueno,
widely used.
overused en los últimos años,
I think
pero
it
que
has
es
even been
algo que el
overused in
ser
the last
humano
few
suele
years.
haciendo
However, it's still something
digamos,
that humans
desde
have been
como tal,
doing
como ser humano, que es
forever,
contar historia, es
basically. And this
la mejor manera para
entails
contar historia.
telling a
¿Y por
story,
qué? ¿Por qué es
finding the best
importante
way to
contar las
tell a
historias? Por
story.
una
Why is it
razón
important to
muy
tell
concreta y muy
stories? There's
sencilla
a
de
very
entender.
easy and
Porque las
specific
historias se
reason.
recuerdan
Because
y los datos no.
stories are remembered,
Y en
data
este
are
aspecto
not.
les voy a leer un pequeño
I would like
texto,
to
muy
read to
corto,
you this
prácticamente,
brief
de
text
Yuval Noah Harari,
by
escrito en su libro 21 Lessons for the 21st
Harari,
Century.
25
Y
from
dice así:
21 Lessons for the
el Homo
21st
sapiens es
Century.
un animal
He says
narrador que
Homo
piensa
sapiens
en
is a
historias más que en
storytelling human
números
that
o gráficos
thinks in
y cree
stories
que el
more than
universo mismo
numbers or
funciona como
graphs.
una
And
historia,
the human
repleta
being
de héroes
believes
y
that the
villanos,
universe works as a
conflictos
story
y
full of
resoluciones,
heroes and
clímax y
villains, conflict
finalización.
and resolutions,
Cuando buscamos
climax
el
and
sentido de la
happy
vida,
endings.
queremos
When
una
we're trying
historia que
to
explique
find
de
the
qué
sense
se
of
trata la vida
life,
y cuál
we
es el
want
papel
a story
particular
that
del trabajo.
explains
Este
reality
papel
and my
me hace
particular
parte de
role
algo
in
más
this
grande
story.
todavía.
This
En tal
role
sentido,
makes
a
me
todas mis
part of a
experiencias
larger
y
story
experiencias.
and it
¿Qué pasa?
provides my
Por qué es tan
choices and
importante? Hay unas
experiences with a
razones
lot of sense.
científicas
Why is
detrás
this so
del
important?
por
Well,
qué hago
there's a
llamar a lo que es
scientific
la historia.
reason
Una razón
explaining
biológica,
why humans
una razón
like
biológica. Y es
storytelling.
que cada
It's a
vez que
biological
escuchamos una
reason.
historia, sobre
Every
todo
time
una
we
buena
hear a
historia,
story, in
en
particular
el
a good
cerebro humano
story,
se empiezan a
in
segregar
the human
oxitocina
brain,
y dopamina.
we
Hormonas
start
relacionadas al
releasing
placer y a la atención.
oxytocin
Y
and
aquí hago
dopamine
un
connected with
abro un
pleasure
pequeño
and
paréntesis,
attention.
considerando que
And
estoy
just a
hablando
brief
a una platea de
side comment,
brillantes
because I know
investigadores.
this
Si algo de
is
esto no
an
es
audience
correcto,
of
pues
great researchers.
queréis
If you
puntualizar algo, pues
feel you want to
cargo está abierto.
correct something that I'm saying or further
¿Qué
clarify
pasa? Que los neurocientíficos
technical concept, please go ahead.
afirman que una
Okay.
buena historia crea un
Neuroscientists
proceso llamado
state that a good story
acoplamiento
creates a
neuronal,
process
es
called
decir,
neural
vibrar en la
coupling.
misma longitud de onda.
So we
En
start
otras palabras,
vibrating at the same
conectamos con la
wavelength.
persona que nos cuenta una historia, sea un
In
novelista,
other
sea un
words, we connect with
escritor,
the
sea
person
un
telling the
músico o
story,
incluso un
a
científico
musician, a
o un
storyteller,
artista.
a
Al mismo
scientist.
tiempo, surge una actividad neuronal por la
Also,
cual
we
nuestro cerebro
create neural
reproduce
activity
la misma
whereby
actividad
our
de la
brain
persona que nos cuenta la historia.
reproduces
Es
or
decir,
replicates the
la
same
vivimos.
activity
Y si
or
estamos
the
transmitiendo
same brain
esta
activity as a
vivimos en
storyteller.
en el día a día, cuando
So we
vemos
start
una
living
novela
the
que nos
story. What
atrapa,
happens to
cuando
us when we
vemos
watch a
una
soap
serie en
opera that we
Netflix
like, when
que
we watch a
nos guste
Netflix
particularmente, o
series
peor, o
that we
sea, si
really
vamos
like,
al cine o vemos
HBO,
pelis,
whatever,
es
if
decir,
we go to the cinema,
sentimos esa historia.
um,
Ese es el
we
acoplamiento
start
neuronal.
feeling the story, and that's this
Sin
coupling
embargo, ¿qué pasa?
that I'm
Que en el
talking about.
ecosistema mediático actual
However, in
hay
the
una
current
competencia
media
altísima
ecosystem,
por
there
algo
is
muy
this
preciado, que
uh,
es nuestra atención. Y
huge
entonces todos
competition for
ustedes, si
something that is
ustedes se
very
ponen a
valuable,
pensar, todos,
our attention.
las redes sociales,
When you
los
think
medios de
about
comunicación, las
social
aplicaciones,
media,
están
media
diseñadas
outlets,
para
applications, they're all designed
captar nuestra
to
atención a
catch
través
our
de
attention
millones de historias.
through millions of
no todas
stories.
son buenas. Y ustedes lo saben
And
perfectamente.
not all of them
Seguramente
are
esta
good, and you
mañana
know
están dando
this.
scroll en su
I'm
móvil, se
sure
han
that
topado en Instagram o en TikTok
today
con
in the
muchísimas historias
morning,
y
when you
la gran mayoría
scrolled
probablemente le habrán
um,
ayudado menos
TikTok,
de un
Instagram, or
segundo de ancho,
whatever, you've
porque no les ha atrapado, ¿no? ¿Qué
encountered
pasa?
many
¿Qué es lo que
stories,
no
but
ha
you have
atrapado?
devoted
Mira,
half a
que
second of your attention
no
to
se han
them.
excitado esos
So
neurotransmisores.
why? Because these
Aquí está el secreto
neurotransmitters haven't
para
been
escribir
excited in
un
your
texto
brain.
divulgativo
And this is why it's
veraz. Hay
important
que
to write
lograr excitar.
a
Esto lo explico de
successful
forma sistemática
scientific piece.
desde
We
la
need to
primera
be able
línea
to
de texto.
excite
Muy
or
bien.
to get the
Y
people to
aquí
release
ustedes
oxytocin and
dirán,
dopamine from the
muy
very
fácil.
first
¿Y
line
cómo
in
se
the
hace
text. And
esto?
you might tell me,
Bueno,
oh, that sounds
no
easy, but
tengo
how do we do
el
this? Well,
secreto absoluto,
I don't
pero
have
sí por la
the ultimate
experiencia y
secret, but
trabajo que
given
hago, hay
my experience and the work
hay una
I've
caja de
done, I
herramientas
know
que
that
sí
there
están a
is a
disposición
toolkit that we have
para usarla y
available
aplicarla a los textos que
and
vamos a
to
escribir. ¿De qué se
implement
trata? En
and
este
to
caso estamos
apply to the
hablando de
texts we're
artículos de
writing. In
divulgación
this case, we're talking
de lo que
about
es la investigación científica. Y vamos a ver
texts that disseminate
estas
specific scientific
herramientas,
research.
empezando por algo que Alma
Let's have a
también
look
la
at the
semana
tools.
pasada
It's something Alma
había
also
subrayado,
mentioned
que
last
es
week.
cómo empezar un texto de forma corta.
How do we
Y aquí me disculparán,
write
pero
a
yo soy italiano,
text that
simplemente por
starts
si
in
acaso
an
hemos
attractive way?
vivido en
Um,
España y
I'm
tratamos
Italian. I've been working it, but I've been
mucho
working in
tiempo
Spain for many years and with Latin
en
America
España
as well.
o
And
latinoamericano,
actually, I
pero
work in a
mi
Spanish
origen italiano
environment, but I'm
siempre me hace
Italian
pensar,
by
cuando
origin.
en esto de
And
empezar un
I
texto,
always think
con un
about
refrán italiano que yo creo
starting
que cada
a
vez tiene
text
razón,
with an
que es
Italian
chi ben
saying.
comincia è a metà dell'opera. Es decir, quien bien empieza y ha
The
logrado
saying
la
is
mitad del
that
trabajo.
who starts well has already
Y
done
esto
half the
vale, por
job.
ejemplo, para cómo
And this
comenzar
is
un texto
true and
de
can be
divulgación
applied to
científica.
this when you
Ahora
start
vamos a ver
writing a
varios
scientific
ejemplos
dissemination
de
text.
distintas fuentes
We
y
will
distintos
be, I will be sharing several examples of
géneros,
different
pero que
sources,
sirven para analizar bien
genres, registers that
aquellos,
are
cuáles
useful
lo que
for us
tienen
to
en común, qué es lo que
analyze
tiene en
what
común un
they
buen
have
comienzo de
in
obra.
common, how they all
La mejor
start
estrategia
effectively.
para captar la atención del
The best
lector
strategy to
es
catch the reader's
producir
attention
desde el principio, desde que
is
se abre la
to,
página, el móvil, lo que sea,
from the very
una
beginning
catarata
on
de
your phone or
preguntas que
whatever,
necesitan
to
respuesta.
provide the brain with a
Vamos a
number
ver.
of questions
Ahora
that
vamos a ver
need
el primer
an
ejemplo.
answer.
Seguramente lo
Let's
conocerán
have a
o lo
look at this
conocerán
first example.
y
I'm
vamos a ver
sure
por
you
qué es
will
tan bueno.
recognize it, and let's see
El
why
día
it's
en que
so
lo iban a
effective.
matar,
The
Santiago
day
Nazar se
on which
levantó
he
a
was
las
going to be
5:30
killed,
de la
Santiago
mañana
Nazar
para
woke up
esperar
at
el buque
5:30 in the
en que
morning to
llegaba el
wait
obispo.
for the boat
No sé si lo han
that was
leído, pero se trata
carrying
del comienzo de Crónica de una
the
muerte
bishop. This
anunciada
is the
de
beginning of
García Márquez.
Crónica de una muerte anunciada,
Ustedes
Chronicle
dirán,
of a
justamente,
Death
y nosotros,
by García Márquez.
incluso yo,
And you might
y
say,
nosotros no somos escritores, ni tenemos,
we're not
ni aspiramos a
writers,
escribir
and
como García Márquez,
we do not
ni
aspire
siquiera
to writing like
a
Garcia
ganar el Premio Nobel
Marquez,
de
not
Literatura.
even,
Pero ¿qué pasa?
getting
Este
the
ejemplo contiene
Nobel
todos los
Prize, a
elementos
literature
que
Nobel
tiene un
Prize.
buen
The thing is
principio de
that
una buena
this
historia,
example
de cualquier
includes
buena
all
historia.
the
¿Y cuáles son?
necessary
Un
elements in a good
protagonista,
story.
un ser humano.
Okay, number one,
Esto
a
es
main character,
importante y lo voy a
a human being.
recalcar a
This
lo
is
largo de
important and
todo el
something
libro.
to consider
Uno de los
uh,
secretos para contar una buena historia
always. One
es
of the
humanizar el
secrets of
texto. Un
good
texto
storytelling is
literario.
humanizing the
Si
text,
no
even
tenéis
in your
presente
dissemination
este
text.
elemento, va a
If
ser
you do
muy
not
difícil
consider
que,
this
digamos,
element, it
despertéis
will be very
despierten la
difficult
atención
for
de los
you
lectores.
to
Hay
call
que
the
tener
reader's
un personaje
attention.
humano.
You need a
Después
human
aquí, en
character.
este comienzo, hay una anticipación,
And here at the
el
beginning,
suspenso
we have the
y una acción que está
anticipation,
a punto de ocurrir.
suspense, and an
Estos
action that
elementos
is about
forman
to
parte de la
take
caja de
place.
herramientas
These are
que se
elements
unen
within
a
the
la hora de
toolbox
escribir un comienzo de
toolbox,
un libro.
and these elements are
Pero
useful when
miremos
writing the
otro ejemplo.
beginning of a story. Another
Trate de
example.
usar su cabeza para multiplicar por
Try to
2
use
el
your
libro.
head to
Otro libro.
multiply by 2 the number
888.628. Lo puede hacer en
8,388,628.
segundos
Can you do it in a few
Es muy
seconds
sencillo.
time?
Se puede duplicar
There's
esta
this
cifra
boy
hasta
that
24
can
veces en cuestión de
duplicate these
segundos.
figures
No
up
falla
to
nunca.
24 times
Hay
in a
otro
few
niño que
seconds. He
puede
never
decirle
fails. There's
siempre
another
el
child who
caso
can
en
tell
cualquier
you
momento del
the
día,
exact time at
incluso
any
cuando
time of
está
the
durmiendo.
day, even when he's
Hay una
sleeping.
niña que puede
There's a
determinar
girl
las
that
medidas exactas de
can
un objeto
determine the exact
situado a
measurements
8
of an
metros de
object
distancia.
located
Hay
8
otra
meters
niña
away.
que a los
There's
6
another
años
girl that at age
pasaba unos
6
dibujos tan
would
vivos y preciosos
draw
que
so
consiguió desde su propia
beautifully
galería de
that
arte
she
en la
managed to
avenida
get her own
México
art
en Nueva
gallery
York.
on Madison Avenue
Pero
in
esto
New
es niño.
York.
Ni
But these
siquiera podían
children
aprender a atar
couldn't even
zapatos.
learn how to tie their
En realidad,
shoelaces.
ninguno de ellos tenía
Actually,
un coeficiente de
none of them
inteligencia
had
inferior a
an
50.
IQ higher than 50.
Esto es el comienzo de Bright
This
Rooms,
is the
un bestseller del
beginning
biólogo
of
molecular
Bridegrooms,
del
a
desarrollo John
bestseller
Murray.
by
Y una de las
John
razones
Murray,
del éxito de ese
development
libro
molecular
es que
biologist.
atrapa
And
a gente
why
de la
was
primera
this
línea
book so
con esta técnica
successful? It's
de
because
prestar
it catches
mucha
your
atención.
attention with this
¿Quiénes son
technique.
estos niños?
First
¿Por
of all,
qué se
so many
encuentran en esta
questions.
situación?
Why are
¿Cómo han
these children? Why
desarrollado
are they
estas
in this
capacidades?
situation? How have they
¿Cómo
developed
pueden, cómo se pueden
these
desarrollar estas adicciones,
skills?
estas
And how
adicciones,
can
estas
you explain
capacidades
this
tan peculiares
contradiction
que
between these
tienen
special
diferencias
skills
físicas?
and
Bueno,
such a low
aquí,
IQ?
aquí es, esa un poco el secreto. Y
And
digamos,
sorry, this is the author,
si
John
tienen la
Medina.
costumbre de leer
And I don't
revistas
know if you
científicas
usually
como
read
Scientific
scientific
American o
journals
Nature,
like Scientific
todas tienen
American or Nature.
estas características.
They all
Y
have
aquí
these
yo he preparado
characteristics.
que voy a hacer un ejemplo de algo que me ha pasado
This
a
is an
mí en
example
primera
of something
persona cuando
that's
estaba
happened to
trabajando
me,
para BBC.
that happened to me when I worked
Era la
for
época
BBC
del
World.
COVID, del
It was
COVID-19,
the time of
y
COVID-19, so
ustedes se acordarán
2020.
que uno de los países, de
And
los
you might
primeros
remember
países, el
that one
primer país
of
en
the
Europa
first countries,
a
so the first
ser,
country
digamos,
in Europe
a
that
tener, digamos, a vivir la difusión del virus fue justamente Italia. Y entonces hacer un programa
suffered
nativo para mí era un poco
the
más
the
difícil.
spread of the virus
Bueno,
was
hacer una
Italy.
entrevista,
I was a
llamar
native Italian,
y ver un
so
poco cuál era
it
la
was easier
situación.
for me to
Pero ¿qué
make the
pasa?
calls, make
Que había un
interviews,
caso,
and
y ahí
see
pueden
what the
poner un
situation
caso
was
muy
like.
peculiar de un
And there was a
experimento
very
que se
special
llevaba a
case about an
cabo en el
experiment that
pequeño
was
pueblo
being
donde se había
conducted in a
detectado
small
los
town
primeros
where they had detected the
infectados por
first
coronavirus, por COVID-19, que
cases
habían
of
desarrollado la enfermedad,
COVID-19
pero no se sabía
and people
bien
who
cómo
had
iba a fluir.
developed
Y por otro
the
lado, yo
disease,
que,
but they
digamos,
didn't
que
know what
escribo
was going to
mucho sobre
happen.
ciencia, soy sincero,
I have actually
tenía
written
un
very
amigo
little about
y además
science, or
escribía
at
en
the
un
time
medio
I had,
que, digamos, en
and I was
esa época
writing
no se llamaba ciencia como BBC Mundo, es que
for the BBC World.
todos
They
los
are
temas
not
de actualidad,
scientific. They talk about
tenía
current
ese reto.
affairs.
Y
So that
entonces,
was
digamos,
challenging for me.
decidí utilizar
So
este
I
comienzo
decided to use
para
this
expresar mi pensamiento.
beginning
Y ustedes dirán
in
si
my
me
story, and you
parece
might say,
acertado o no.
you will tell
Bo
me
Euganio
if
era,
it was right
hasta
or
hace un
not.
mes, un
Bo
bonito pueblo en
Eugenio
el norte
was,
de
until
la
a
región
month
de
ago,
Veneto,
and
en
a
el norte
nice
de Italia.
town in the region of Veneto,
Estaba
in the
justo en
north
las
of
laderas de unas
Italy,
colinas
on the
volcánicas,
sides of
a media hora en
volcanic
auto de la ciudad de Padua. Bo era
mountains, half an
famoso
hour
por
away
su vino
from
Prosecco,
Padua.
su
Bo was
parque
famous
natural
for
y
its
los cercanos
Prosecco,
establecimientos
its
termales.
natural park, and the
Pocos
nearby
habrían imaginado que ese
spring
idílico escenario
waters.
se
Very few
convertiría en
had
pocas
imagined that
semanas
this
en uno de los
amazing
números epicentros de
setting
la
would
epidemia de
become in a few
COVID-19.
weeks' time
Y menos aún,
one of the
todos los que
epicenters of the
podían
COVID
siquiera
19
pensar
pandemic
que Bo
in
Euganio
Italy.
sería el escenario de
And
una
it was impossible
experimentación
to predict that
científica.
Bo Gaña would be the
A
setting
principios de
of a
febrero,
unique
Adrián y
scientific
Renato,
experiment.
dos
At the
vecinos
beginning
de
of
esta
February,
localidad
Adriano
de
and Renato, two
3.300
neighbors from
habitantes,
this
estaban internados en un
place
hospital de
of
la zona por una
3,300
gripe.
inhabitants, were in
Pues como
hospital
veréis, digamos, están a
because
intentar aplicar
they
al
had
intento un
pneumonia.
poco de las herramientas que
Okay, as you
hemos
can
estado
see, I
viendo hasta
try to
ahora,
implement
¿no?
some of these
La
tools
parte
in my
humana, la
text. The
suspensión, el giro,
human
¿no? Algo
characters,
inexplicable,
suspense,
un
the
pueblo,
twist,
digamos,
something
idílico, donde no pasa
unexpected, an
absolutamente nada, y
idyllic
de
town where
golpe se
nothing happens,
convierte en el
and
epicentro
from
de la
one
pandemia en
day to the
Europa, en
other, it
Italia,
becomes the
y
epicenter of the
además
pandemic
escenario
in
de un
Italy,
experimento, porque al
in
final
Europe.
ese
And
principio fue muy
also,
interesante, no sé si lo
this
conocen,
was
cerraron durante dos
scenario of an
semanas
experiment. I don't know if
todo el
you know
pueblo
about this, but
y
for
a
2 weeks
todos los
they closed
habitantes
down the town
le hicieron un
and
hisopado
every
para ver, y
inhabitant
ahí se dieron
was
cuenta, en
tested for
particular
COVID.
no los
And
vecinos
that's how
italianos,
they realized, actually,
los
an Italian
habitantes, se dieron
epidemiologist,
cuenta de que muchos
they
desarrollaban
realized that
COVID
many of them
sin
would
tener
develop the
sin tener síntomas de la
disease
enfermedad.
without any kind of symptoms, or have COVID without the symptoms. And then that shared information on how the pandemic spread, etc. It was very interesting. But as you can see, this was a huge challenge for me. So I tried to implement these tools. I tried
para intentar acercarme al lector, a un lector común,
to get closer to just a regular reader, so that I would be telling a story they might be interested in, and also to explain something that was quite different and complex from the word go.
De ejemplo, siempre quiero
And
hacer
I provide many
ejemplos
examples
de dos
because
autores del IAI, de Irene Torres y de
I remember from the
Omar de Feo,
IAI,
perdón, que
Irene
publicaron
Torres and
hace
Omar
unos
de
años
Feo published this a
para
few
L21
years
y que
ago.
después
This is another
publicamos
example.
en
They
otro.
published this article
Era
for
un tema
L21.
también
And
complicado,
this was a
un tema
difficult
de los
topic.
que los editores llamamos temas duros, ¿no?
It's
Duros
hardcore
de
subjects,
digerir, de
as we call
acercar
them, because they're difficult to
y se llamaba
digest,
el deterioro de las
difficult
playas
for readers. It was
a
called
algo
the
más que su base.
deterioration of
Entonces el tema de
beaches will
fondo era el
affect
deterioro
more than
de
just your
las playas
holidays,
y todo lo que,
because it was
digamos,
talking about
comportaba.
damage to beaches and what
¿Perdón?
that entailed.
Vale, pues no, y entonces al final, después de varias idas y venidas
So
con
at the
Irene y Omar,
end of
pues al
several,
final, digamos, el
drafts
consenso
and all that,
que surgió. No, no sé si alguien está
someone
hablando,
has their
perdón,
mic on
tengo
and they
casco
shouldn't.
y
Sorry.
es como que si me estuviese
There's
hablando
some
al lado.
sound
Sí, es muy interesante.
coming in.
Quizás lo dejamos un momento, 5 minutos para preguntas y lo debatimos. Y entonces les voy a leer el principio.
Okay.
Cuando nos imaginamos la playa, nos
So
viene a la
let's
mente el movimiento
read
de
out
las
the
olas,
beginning. When we
los
think about
partidos
the
de fútbol en la
beach,
arena,
we think
o
about the
las risas
movement
de
of the
los niños
waves,
chapoteando en
football
las olas.
matches
Sin
on the
embargo,
sand,
no
the
somos
laughter of
conscientes de
children
que nuestras
in the
playas
water.
están
However,
sufriendo
we
lo
are
que
not
conoce
aware of the
como
fact that our
estrés
beaches
costero.
are suffering from
Aquí, digamos,
what is
el
known as
punto era,
coastal
el
stress.
desafío era cómo
Here, the
acercar
challenge
algo
was to make
digamos, complejo como el
this,
deterioro de
which
la
is so
playa, a la
complex, which is
experiencia
beach
normal, común y
stress, and
corriente
how
de las
to
personas.
make it
Y entonces
relatable
un poco la
for
idea
regular
fue, a
people.
ver, cualquiera en verano ha ido de
So,
vacaciones en
anyone
verano
has
y
been
sabe que no son las olas, ha
to a
jugado un
beach in
partido de fútbol
summer, they are
o,
familiar
si
with
lo ha hecho con
waves,
sus
they've
hijos,
played
partido en
football,
familia, muy bonito,
they have been to
en
the
la orilla.
beach with the
Y a
children.
partir de ahí, digamos, empecemos a
So from
insertar
that point, we
poco a poco
started to
algunos elementos para
include some elements
dar la
gradually
historia, ¿no? Dar la
in
historia
order to
e
provide a framework
intentar
for the
atrapar la atención
story
del lector.
and to try to catch the reader's attention.
Y en los cuatro ejemplos anteriores hay un elemento sobre todo en común.
These four
Que la
examples have
pregunta o
a
el
common
problema,
element.
que
The
es lo que
questions
realmente
or
atrapa la
the
atención,
problem, so
está
what's
al
actually
principio.
catching people's
Que eso es algo
attention,
que, digamos,
they
en el
appear at the
taller de Alma
beginning.
también ha surgido, ¿no? ¿Por
And
qué?
this was also present in Alma's
Una de las
workshop.
dificultades
Why? Because
mayores
one
para
of
los
the
científicos
main
es
difficulties for
entender que hay que
scientists is
invertir
understanding
el
that we need
triángulo, ¿no? De
to
hecho, Alma
place the
en su
triangle
informe, en su
upside
presentación,
down.
lo ponía al
Alma,
revés,
in her
el triángulo.
presentation, would
Porque hay que ver del problema, hay
presented
que
the
presentar la
triangle
situación, lo más
with a top
importante, y
down.
después,
Because
a lo
first we
largo del
need to present the
texto, hay
situation,
que
the
ir
most important
insertando
thing.
la
And then
presentación, el
throughout the text, you
contexto,
need to
la
include
metodología y todo lo que
explanations, context,
enriquece el texto.
methodology,
Pero si
and
no empezamos
everything
por
that
el problema,
makes
si
a
no
text rich.
empezamos a
But we need to
desarrollar
start with
esa
the
catarata de
problem. We need to
preguntas en el
develop
lector, de la que
those
hablaba antes,
questions
va a
in the
ser
reader's
difícil que el lector
mind.
después llegue a la
Otherwise, it will be
información,
difficult for
llegue a
the
la
reader
metodología,
to
llegue
actually
a las conclusiones que yo he explicado.
read
Y
the
repito,
results,
con la
conclusions,
experiencia
methodology,
de
etc.
trabajar con
And as I have
académicos,
experience working
sé
with
que, digamos,
researchers
esto
and
es lo
academicians,
primordial.
I know
Hay que
that this is
entender
the main
que
thing to
lo que
do.
queremos decir,
We need to
el
understand that
problema,
what
realmente
we
la
want to
situación,
do,
hay que
the
ponerlo
problem, the
cuanto antes posible. A
situation,
ser posible,
needs to be
desde la
mentioned
primera
as soon as
explicación.
possible, if
Y
possible from the
después
very
seguir
beginning.
con el resto.
And then you can go on to include the rest.
Y como les decía, siempre, ¿no? Los académicos, en un paper o generalmente en sus en sus
And as I was
trabajos.
saying,
Los científicos lo
academicians
hacen al
in
reverso, ¿no?
in the
Dan el
articles,
cuadro amplio y detallado y
they do the
después analizan
opposite.
los casos
First, they
concretos.
provide the
Pues
whole
bien,
background, and then they
cuando queréis
provide
escribir un
the
artículo de
cases.
divulgación, tenéis
But when
que hacer
you want to
exactamente
write a
al revés.
scientific
Empezar
dissemination
por
piece, you need
los
to
casos
do the
concretos,
opposite.
case study,
You need to
la
start by
anécdota,
specific
la
cases, the
historia, una cosa
anecdote, the
específica, algo
story,
que cualquier lector
specific details,
pueda
something that
leer
any
y
reader
con el cual pueda
will be able
vibrar,
to
¿no?
read
Porque, como decía al
and
principio,
vibrate to.
que lo pueda hacer ese
As I was saying at the
acoplamiento
beginning,
neuronal, puede
we need
entenderlo,
that
puede verlo
neural
explicado para
coupling
después entender
so
también el
that
contexto, las evidencias, los
they
resultados
can then
y
understand the
todo esto.
context, evidence, results, and all that.
Vale. Ir, eso, como del particular al general.
So we need to go from the particular to the general.
Ahora, digamos, después de estas primeros dos módulos,
So after
ahora
these
viene la
two
parte,
modules,
digamos,
now we
más
have
práctica, ¿no?
the
De
most practical
ordenar las
part,
ideas. Es decir,
which
una vez que
entails
tengamos el
organizing
comienzo, ¿no? Que
ideas.
hemos
Once you have
identificado
the
cuál es el
beginning, we
problema
have
del
identified the
que queremos
problem
hablar.
we want to
¿Cómo lo
address.
configuramos? ¿Cómo lo
How do we
estructuramos? ¿No?
put
Y
this
aquí,
together?
digamos, hay que recordar que
And
hay
here
que
we
hacerlo, hay
must
que estructurar un
remember that
texto
we need
siempre
to
con el
structure a
objetivo de
text
que el
with the
lector no
aim
levante la vista.
so that the reader does not
Claramente
stop reading.
no hay una receta para el éxito
Clearly,
asegurado,
there is
porque si no,
no
además de ser
magic
un muy feliz
solution
editor del Eventbrite,
because I
también
would be such
necesitaría
a happy
arquitectura
editor
de
at
reserva, que es
Latin
una
America
mujer bien económica
21, but
que
I
sería
would probably
más,
write
más gratificante.
bestsellers if I had,
No existe. Y quien lo
the
diga,
magic
digamos,
solution.
lo
It
quiere
doesn't
hacer para vender
exist.
sus libros o
If
para
someone
vender sus
says
libros.
that it
Pero
does, they do it to sell their books
hay
or whatever.
estrategias que funcionan. Hay
However,
estrategias que
there are
funcionan, hay
strategies
herramientas que se puedan usar
that work. There
y
are
ahora
tools
vamos
that
a
can
ver
be
algunas.
used. Let us now have a look at a few of them.
Y en particular, digamos, las herramientas
In
a la que,
particular,
por ejemplo, en el
the
L21 nos inspiramos
in
son,
L21,
digamos, son
we
las
find
que emplean los
inspiration
editores del
on
The
the
Economist,
tools
que es la
used
revista una de las
by
revistas
The
económicas
Economist, which
políticas
is one
más
of the
prestigiosas
most
que
prestigious political and economy
eh,
magazines in the
existen
world.
en el mundo, ¿no? Además, piensen, les doy una anécdota. El
Also,
primer número de la
just an
revista The
anecdote, the
Economist fue
first issue of The
publicado, se vendió
Economist
en los
was
kioscos o donde
published.
fuera en Londres
It
el
was
2 de
in
septiembre de
London on the
1843
2nd of September
y
of
se sigue publicando.
1843,
Es decir,
and it's still
algo
being
tendrá
published.
de bueno.
So
Y a este
they
respecto
must be
les
doing
quiero
something
comparar
right.
si, digamos,
Um,
le leo un
Now I
artículo,
would like
pequeño
to
artículo de,
read
digamos,
out
el
to
comienzo, un
you
artículo de The
the
Economist
very
que salió
beginning
hace unos años, que no es de ámbito
The Economist
científico, pero
article
que
that was
sí nos
published a
puede
few years
ayudar a
ago.
entender
It's not
algunas de
scientific,
las
but it can help
técnicas,
us understand
digamos,
some of the
que vamos a ver,
techniques
etcétera.
that we can
Imagine usted
use.
que tiene 45
So the
años
hook.
y que es un
Imagine you are
conductor de
45
camión.
years old and you're
Usted
a lorry
nunca le gustó
driver.
la escuela y la
You
abandonó
never liked
tan pronto como
school
pudo,
and you
con un
dropped out as
montón de
soon
malas
as
notas y no
possible
mucha pasión
with
por la
bad
enseñanza.
grades and not
Su
much
trabajo
passion for
ahora es
teaching
agotador y
or for
solitario,
learning. Now
pero
your
por lo
job
menos le
is
ofrece la
exhausting
seguridad
and
de una
lonely,
ocupación
but at
decente.
least you have
La carencia
a
de buenos
security of
conductores de
having a
camión
decent
es una
profession.
queja permanente en
The
ese
lack of
mundo
good lorry
y la
drivers
edad media de la
is
fuerza de
a permanent
trabajo es
complaint
elevada.
in the industry.
48 años
And
es grande en ese mundo.
48 and
Verán,
workers are
o sea, se trata
48
de lo que les
years
decía,
old
un
on
artículo
average in
duro. O
Britain.
sea,
So
¿cómo
this is a
puedo poner al
difficult
necesario
article.
interesado, atención del
How
lector,
can I hook
hablándoles
the
de la
reader's
carencia de
attention by
conductores de camión
talking to
en
them
Inglaterra?
about the lack of
Es
lorry
un
drivers in the
esfuerzo
UK?
digamos,
You need to make an effort
de
and
imaginarse a alguien. Y que ese alguien
imagine
probablemente
someone and
ustedes
imagine
mismos
coming up with
conocerán
someone.
algunas
I'm sure
personas
you've met
en los
someone
estudios no le iba muy bien, que
who
decidió
didn't
de
do
no ir a
well
la
at
facultad
school, who
quizás,
decided
decidió
not to go to
emplearse,
university,
digamos, desde temprana edad,
who got
yo
a
lo he hecho,
job when they were
temprana
very
edad,
young for
por
several
razones
reasons,
económicas.
because they didn't have the
Pero
money to go to university or for whatever
visualizando la
reason.
persona.
But we're trying to
Estamos
picture
viendo, estamos
someone,
entendiendo
we're
cuáles son
seeing them,
sus problemas.
we
Y es lo
understand
mejor que
what
hay.
their problems are.
Entonces ahí viene
So this
la
is
primera
where
técnica
we
para
get the first technique for a good beginning. Writing a good hook, a visual description of a main character, or a situation that leads us directly into the situation we want to focus on. Alma talked about hook, and I'm saying gancho in Spanish. It's the same thing. It's something that hooks us because we want to know what all this is about. And we want to, get the people curious and interested in the topic. Okay, first hook. Number two, summarizing or defining the problem. We need to state the problem to be addressed in the article. And this is very important. We shouldn't lie to the reader. We need to tell them immediately why we're telling this story, why it's important for them to read it, why they must go on reading. And we shouldn't delay this moment too much. The moment when we set the problem, because the hook is fine, it's impactful, it gets people's attention, but we shouldn't go overboard because we shouldn't waste people's time because the reader wants to know what the article is about. Also, it's also very important to preserve scientific validity. So we need to always present or mention data and sources. Number four, development. What will be done to solve the problem? So what might happen if this is done or if something else is not done? What might happen if nothing is done? Then we have the proposal. What's happening? What is being done to solve this problem? Both. What has been done over time in similar situations, I don't know, 5 years ago, 3, 10, 20 years ago, and also geographically. Which are the other situations, countries, regions that are facing this same problem? How are they facing the problem? Which strategies are they implementing? Which results are they getting? What can we learn from the negative results? And that's very important for those of you who will want to write for a Latin American audience. When we think about a situation that is being studied, for instance, at a specific country or region, it's very important to connect that with what is happening in another part of the region. Then there's the risks. There are the results, yes, no, why yes, why no, which are the expectations as well. Next, comparisons. And this is similar to the proposal, but you also compare different studies on the same subject. And finally, conclusion. Please remember that this is an ideal outline. Some of these elements might take up more space than others, that might require more development. Also, you might decide to skip some of the elements or just provide an overview of some elements depending on the subject we address. But this is just to give you an idea so that you are not afraid of the blank page when you have to write a story. There's also a very useful strategy. And after this, in a few minutes, we'll make a break. And this is essential. We need to divide the text into key points. That is to say, we need to create lists. And this is a cognitive trick to control the mind. First of all, the brain processes chunks more easily. And also the brain tends to get distracted. An example, if I were to ask you for your phone number, I'm sure you won't tell me every number one as a figure, as in 3 million. No, you will use 2 or 3 numbers at a time. because that's much easier to process, to remember for you and for the person jotting down the phone number.
Además, las listas ahorran un
Also,
montón de
lists
tiempo, tanto a
save
quien escribe
us
como a
a
quien
lot of
lee.
time,
¿Por
both
qué?
for writers
Porque
and
se puede
readers.
hacer más
Why?
concretos, ¿no? Y si
Because
algo
we
es
need
más
to be more
concreto, nos
precise.
permite entenderlo mejor.
And if
Y
that's the case, then
hay una
it's
frase
easier for us to understand.
de Umberto Eco, que
Umberto
escribió un
Eco
ensayo
said something
muy, muy, muy
interesting. He
bonito
wrote a
hace años ya,
a
que se llama
very beautiful
El vértigo de las
essay
listas, que reza así.
called The
La
Vertigo of
lista es el
Lists.
origen
He
de la
says,
cultura.
the list is the
¿Qué
origin
es
of
lo que quiere
culture.
la cultura?
What does
Hacer que
culture
la
want?
infinitud
Culture
sea
wants
comprensible. Y ustedes
infiniteness
verán,
to
uno
be
de los,
understandable.
digamos,
And
pilares
as you will
de las
see, one of the
culturas
pillars
occidentales, ¿no?
of
que
Western
es la Biblia, que es el libro,
cultures,
y donde
for
hay
instance,
una
is
lista
the
muy
Bible,
famosa,
where we
los
have a
versículos
very
son muy famosos,
famous
tanto
list
para quien
that has
cree como
become
para
so
quien no, que son
famous
los 10
for
mandamientos de Moisés.
Christians
Y
and
ahí se,
non-Christians, and these are
digamos, en
Moses's Ten
este
Commandments.
capítulo de la Biblia en
If in that
ese
chapter
apartado
or paragraph
se
or
contara,
whatever of
digamos,
the Bible,
con dato
we
pormenorizado,
had
nadie se acordaría los
specialized
10 mandamientos.
data
En
about
cambio,
blah, blah, blah. Nobody
enseguida
would remember the
lo podemos
commandments.
recordar y
However, we
es
do remember them
mucho más
easily. It's
simbólicamente
10,
fácil
it's a
ponerlos
symbolic
al
number
alcance de las manos, ¿no?
because we have 10
Incluso
fingers.
uno se puede
Uh,
ayudar con los
and you might
números para
even help
entonces,
yourself
con esto
remember
de
by
las listas,
counting
vamos a
with your
aprovechar
fingers.
para hacer un
So
ejercicio y de paso
let's
descansar
now
5 minutos.
focus on this
Me
exercise and
gustaría,
take a 5-minute break.
me gustaría
Okay,
que escojan
exercise
un
1.
tema que conocen
Please
bien
choose a topic you know
y
well
hagan una lista con 5
and
puntos
make a
clave
list of
para
5
explicarlo. Por ejemplo,
key
si
points you would
vuestro tema
use to
de
explain the
estudio
topic.
es
For instance, if
la
your
contaminación
topic is
de los mares,
uh,
quiero que decir
sea
5 puntos que
pollution,
explican por
please
qué es
jot down
importante
5 points that explain
explicar
why
la
it's important
contaminación de los
to
mares a personas
explain
que no son
sea
científicos.
pollution
O
to
5 puntos que explican
non-scientists,
cómo
or
funciona
5 key
el
points that
niño. O
explain
5 puntos que
how
explican
El Nino works, or
cómo
5 key points that
actúa
explain
lo que sea. Y,
how
digamos,
whatever
después lo vamos a
works.
analizar juntos y
And
así lo
after
vamos
that,
a
we will go
compartir y
through
después
this
seguimos
together, share it,
siguiendo.
and then
Ahora
we
dejo
resume
compartir
the
la
activity.
pantalla
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now.
y además, antes de empezar, quizás 2 minutos,
And
no
before
sé
we
si tienen
start, maybe for
alguna
2
pregunta,
minutes,
algo que
are
quieran
there any
contestar
questions,
antes de
comments,
hacer la lista
anything you
o
would like to say
aclarar.
before we
Por
start with
supuesto,
exercise
aprovechar 2
1?
minutos antes de
We
hacer el
can
ejercicio y
maybe take
tomarnos la
these
pausa
2
para ver
minutes
cosas que nos
before the
puedan ayudar.
exercise and break to address these doubts.
Vale, pues por lo que entiendo está todo claro. Entonces son
Okay, so everything seems to be
42.
clear.
Yo
So it's
diría,
42
si les parece
past.
bien,
If you
volver
agree,
a
I would say
55,
let's back 55
12
past.
minutos, así
So that's
tenemos
12
para hacer la
minutes
lista y para
so
tomar
that
un
we
par
have
de
time
notas.
to write the list and have some
Y a
water.
55 volvemos
Okay?
y me
We'll
dicen
be back
cuáles son los 5 puntos
55
de su lista.
past.
Es un
And then you
trabajo
tell me which
obligatorio,
the 5 key
No
points
se
are. And
inventen
this is
vuestra
mandatory,
cabeza.
a mandatory assignment, okay? You must do it.
Me encanta. I put in the chat the directions in Spanish
Ok,
for those who need it. And we'll see everyone back here at 55 after the hour.
perfecto.
Thank you, Angelo.
Hasta ahora.
see how you've done.
Angelo, tengo una pregunta.
Sí, Daniela, dime.
Angelo, I have a question.
El ejercicio era como
The
citar
exercise
puntos sobre un
was
tema,
entailed
pero
quote,
no
including the
necesariamente
key
como
points of a
en el
topic,
orden
but not
de ideas, así
necessarily
como que cuál
in
es
the right order, let's
el
say,
problema o la
No,
solución,
no,
y
no, no,
simplemente
no.
regarding
como
problem,
tipo
solution, and all that. It's
facts,
just key
no sé,
points,
hechos sobre
Sí,
problema, información
like
sobre
facts or
un tema.
information. Yes,
exacto.
it was that,
Este,
exactly that.
digamos, el objetivo de este ejercicio
The aim of
es
this exercise
ayudar o mirar cómo se
is
pueden
to
organizar
help us
las
see
ideas,
how we can
qué
organize
guión se pueden adoptar
ideas,
para contar
which
algo
viewpoints we can
Por eso es, no
address
sé
to
si...
tell an
Daniela,
interesting
¿quieres
story.
empezar tú? Aprovecho...
Daniela, maybe you can start now that you
¿Quieres
have
empezar
kind
a
of
mirar un poco tu
volunteered.
lista?
Let's have a look at your list.
Bueno, sí.
Okay,
Bueno,
let's do that.
no en un orden así como específico,
So
pero
it's in no
estoy
specific order.
investigando sobre el
I'm
tema del calor
researching
extremo en las ciudades y cómo
extreme
se pueden
heat in
adaptar mejor.
cities and how we can better
Entonces,
adapt.
la cosa es, dime
Okay,
5 puntos
so
por
please
qué
share with
es
us the 5
importante hablar del
points
calor extremo en las
explaining why
ciudades.
it's important to talk about
Ok.
extreme heat in
Uno,
cities.
el calor
Okay,
toma silenciosamente
1,
más vidas que cualquier
heat
otro
takes
fenómeno climático.
lives more silently,
Dos,
more lives
la
than any
presencia o no
other
de
climate
arbolado urbano
event.
puede
2,
crear hasta 12 grados de
the
diferencia
presence
de
or
temperatura.
absence of trees in the cities can create a
Las
temperature
personas
difference
más
of up to
vulnerables
12
tienden a ser
degrees.
las
3, the
personas
most
mayores
vulnerable
y los
people
niños.
are usually older people
Sí.
and
Y
children.
la forma en la que están construidas las ciudades
And the
crea
way in which cities are built
afecta las
create
temperaturas
microclimates
restringidas
that
y por lo
affect
tanto impacta en
the
la salud humana y en la
temperature
biodiversidad.
and impact human
Y
health
el
and
calor afecta a
biodiversity.
todo mundo, pero no
And
afecta a
heat
todo mundo por igual.
affects
Bueno,
everyone,
perfecto.
but not in the
Y
same
mira,
way.
ya con esos elementos, ya se puede
Great.
empezar a
Okay.
bastir unas
So you already
hipótesis.
have
Por
the
ejemplo,
elements to start
has
writing
has
an
mencionado
op-ed.
exactamente que no a todo el
Um,
mundo le afecta
for
por igual.
instance, you
Entonces
said that
vayamos a
not everyone
buscar.
is
Ha habido
affected in the
casos,
same
por
way.
ejemplo, han salido en la
Okay,
prensa
let's look
casos de
for ways,
personas que hayan
famous
tenido un problema
cases of
de salud
people who've had
debido
a
a
health
demasiadas
issue,
hojas de
a
cambio
child, an
a
elderly
causa de esto,
lady,
o cuántas
because of the heat,
hospitalizaciones ha habido
or
el año
how many
pasado, en qué ciudad te
hospitalizations
encuentras, o
were there
cuál, la
last
Ahora
year
ciudad
en
en
because of
Montevideo.
concreto.
this.
Vale.
Which city
Pues,
are
por
you
ejemplo,
focusing
no sé cuál
on?
es, si eres
Montevideo.
Montevideo, la ciudad
Okay.
de, digamos, del estudio.
Are you
Estoy entre
studying
Río de
Montevideo?
Janeiro y Ciudad de México.
I'm studying
Perfecto.
the city of Mexico and Río de
En
Janeiro. Okay.
2024
In
ha
Rio de Janeiro
habido
in 2024,
15 casos,
there
20
were
casos, 30
15,
casos de
20,
personas que
30
han muerto en la
cases of
ciudad
people
a
who
causa del
have
calor.
died in the
Un
city because
incremento
of
de
extreme heat.
20%, 30%
And
con respecto.
this is an
Y
increase
además,
of,
esto
I don't know,
pasa también
20%
en Ciudad de
compared
México.
to
Y las personas
another
más
year.
afectadas
And
son
this also happens in the
niños
city of
y
Mexico. The people most
ancianos
affected
que
are
viven en
children
determinadas
and
zonas.
older adults that
Ese es
live in
el
a
problema.
specific area.
Entonces, quizás yo puedo,
And maybe
¿cómo decir?
um,
Empatizar, ¿no? Con una
I
persona, bueno,
can
casi todos
empathize
yo
with
tengo
an
la suerte de tener una
older
abuela
adult. I am
y
so
sé qué le
fortunate to
pasaría a
have
mi
a
hija si
grandmother, for
hubiera calor, una
instance,
ola de
and I
calor,
know
de que
that the same thing
no
would
tuviese
happen
la
to her
posibilidad de
if there was a
estar
heat
cubierta
wave and
o a la sombra durante
she
las
wasn't able
estaciones del
to
año, pues claro que le
stay out
afectaría.
of the
O
sun, for
personas que
instance.
tienen comorbilidades,
It
¿no?
would be a
Y
problem. There are
ahí,
people with
digamos, ahora que hemos
comorbidities, for
definido los
instance.
5 puntos,
So
esos
now that
puntos,
you have your
tenemos más o
5
menos la idea.
key
A partir de ahí,
points,
vamos desgranando el
from
resto de
that
texto.
on,
Vamos
we will be
insertando los
able to
datos,
build
vamos insertando los puntos
the
y lo vamos
the entire
ampliando de
text. We
manera
will
que
be
todo el mundo
inserting the
pueda leer
data, the
algo que
studies,
igual
and we will try
interesante,
to show
aunque acontezca
people
en Río
something
y en
that
la
is
Ciudad de México.
interesting, even if it's happening in
¿Lo
Rio
ves
and
bien? ¿Te
the city
parece
of
un
Mexico.
planteamiento
Sí, súper.
útil?
So what do you think
Sí,
about
sí.
this idea?
Pero no sé si tienes
Yeah, it
preguntas
sounds very
o...
good. Any questions you might have or someone
No, la
else?
verdad que sí, entiendo esa lógica, va quedando más clara
Yes, I
de
understand how you
cómo crear ese
what you're trying
gancho
to show us.
y,
It's
bueno, plantear
now I have a better
preguntas o
idea of
conectar esos
how to
puntos que
create
van
this
creando
hook
otras preguntas
and present
y, bueno,
questions or
generando las respuestas. Sí.
include items that are key
Esta es
points
una
that are
manera.
important
Ojo, también
in
hay
order to
otra.
provide
Tu
answers as well.
texto podría
This
ser
is a way to do
5
this.
razones
There
por
are
la
other
cual
ways.
es
Your
importante
text might include
cambiar
5 reasons
la
why it's
estructura urbana de la
important to
ciudad para
change
evitar los
the
contagios.
urban
Y entonces, bueno, esa es la
structure
regla.
of
Entonces,
cities. For
construye 5
instance,
mini textos
So you build 5 small texts, including reasons why, I don't know, you want to prove your thesis. So you need some sort of internal order, or you can use this same structure to talk about your the results of your research or achievements. This can
Buenísimo,
be
gracias.
used both ways, actually. Thank you. You're welcome. More questions?
Voy a empezar a llamar yo, ¿eh? Aunque
I'm
tenga
going to
la
start
cámara,
calling out your
la cámara
names,
apagada. Voy a
even if
empezar
your
a
camera
llamar.
is off.
Antes de que me llames.
Okay, before
Por
you
favor,
call out
Daniel.
my name.
Angelo. No,
Yes,
muy
please go ahead,
interesante, y de hecho
Daniel.
tengo una pregunta
This is
sobre-
very
sobre lo
interesting.
que
I
habías,
do have a question
comentado
about
antes, pero
what
antes
you
quiero-
have said
quiero decir mis
before.
puntos porque,
But I
llamo
would like
yo,
to
y a propósito,
share
pues
my
sí,
key
o sea,
points with you
bueno, esto es un tema en el que
because
estoy trabajando
I have
ahorita,
chosen a
pero,
topic
digamos
I'm
que
working
está
on
enmarcado
right
dentro de todo
now,
un marco,
but it
valga la
actually
redundancia, un marco
falls
conceptual,
within a
con terminología
conceptual
muy específica. Entonces,
framework
realmente
that
me
has
costó
specific terminology.
tratar de
So
salirme
I found it very
y poder
difficult
puntualizar
to
las
not
cinco ideas
use
de manera
that
que no dejara
terminology
de
to
sonar técnico.
include these
Entonces,
5 points,
lo voy a decir
because
como
I
más o
still
menos
want it to
tengo, pero
sound
aún
technical in
siento
a
que hay
way.
que, como dijiste,
So these are my key
desmenuzarlo y desglosarlo
points,
mucho más.
but I think
Pero aquí,
I
bueno,
need
vamos a
to
ver que
provide more
comience.
information.
La primera idea es, la
Okay,
economía depende
number
y tiene
one,
impactos en el
the
ambiente natural. Así
economy
como la idea macro, ¿no? La economía
depends
depende y tiene impactos
on
en el ambiente
and
natural.
impacts the
Dos,
natural
la
environment.
funcionalidad ecológica
Two,
deriva en flujos de
uh,
servicios ecosistémicos que
ecological
la economía
functionality
utiliza
leads to ecosystem
para
service
producir
flows that
beneficios
the economy
contables.
uses to
La tercera idea es la misma,
provide
solo que la
countable
funcionalidad
benefits.
ecológica
Number 3 is
deriva
the
en
same, but
flujos y
it says that
servicios
ecological
ecosistémicos que la economía
functionality
utiliza
leads to
para
ecosystem
producir
service
para
flows that the
hacer
economy
beneficios
uses
no
to
contables.
produce
Eh,
non-countable
Los servicios
benefits.
ecosistémicos son beneficios que
Ecosystem
pueden producir
services
beneficios
are
públicos
benefits
o privados, ¿no?
that can
Es como
produce
un poco lo
public or
mismo, pero hay
private benefits. It's the same
está
thing
lo
in a
contable, lo no
way,
contable, y privado y
but
público. Y
there's
finalmente,
this
lo que
public-private
la
opposition.
economía devuelve al sistema natural
And
en forma de
finally,
flujos físicos o
what the
monetarios deriva
economy gives
impactos sobre
back
el
to the
capital
natural
natural
system in
que
the
está
form of
produciendo pues,
a
estos servicios
physical on
ecosistémicos.
monetary flows has an
Lo cierto que hay
impact
mucha
on the natural
terminología
capital
específica que no sé hasta qué punto hay
that is
que
being
Mira,
produced.
lo
I
miramos,
feel that there's a
me
lot
alegro,
of
digamos,
technical
gracias por lo
terminology.
hayas presentado
I
y
don't know how
además,
to
digamos,
tone
me
it down.
apoyaré a nuestra relación de
Thank you.
amistad, más allá de la
Okay,
relación de
I know we're
amistad, para
friends,
decir
so
que es
I
un
can
muy buen
tell you
ejemplo de
that
muchas cosas que
this is
yo
a
creo
great
que no hay que hacer.
example of many things that we shouldn't do,
Si
actually.
me permites, si
Sí,
If
no,
I
no,
may.
exacto.
lo digo porque,
Yes,
repito,
please go ahead.
creo que es importante
Because I
porque
think
es
this
lo
is
más
very
común a veces que
important,
pasa.
because
O sea,
this is what
muchas
happens
veces
most often.
yo, digamos, leyendo esa
I'm
lista, no he entendido de lo
reading
que
or
están
listening to
hablando.
your list and I
O
don't know
sea,
what you're talking
no
about.
han logrado el objetivo de
So
fondo que es
your list hasn't
hacer más
achieved your
entendible y
aim, which
aclarar
is
más lo que
making
estamos diciendo.
science
Y
more
una de las
understandable.
razones es porque,
And
exactamente, como
one of
dices
the
tú, y es algo
reasons
que
is the
veremos
following,
más
as you're
adelante,
saying, and this is something
se
we'll see
emplea una
later on.
terminología muy
We
propia de
use
tipo, por supuesto,
terminology
científico,
that is
pero
very
que, digamos, en el
scientific,
registro cotidiano
but
es muy difícil
in
de entender. Yo no
it's
sé
very
qué
difficult
es el
for regular people
consumismo
to
y qué
understand.
es.
I
Sobre
don't know
todo
what you
muchas
mean
de las
by
palabras que has empleado, para
flow.
mí
You've
son
used
muy
so many
difíciles. En
questions that are
cambio,
very
solo
many
para
words
hacer
that are
un
difficult for me
mayor
to
contexto,
understand.
con el ejemplo anterior de
Uh,
Daniela, si tú me
and
hablas
remember
de
Daniela's
personas
example. If
que
you
a no
talk to
todas las
me
personas le afectan
about
igual, o a estas
or
ciudades
you
algo
say that
les
people are not
revienta
affected in the
porque
same
tal. Son
way, or in
ejemplos
these cities
concretos
there's an
que me
increase
permiten,
of
digamos,
whatever.
unir
These
los
are
puntos y
specific
entender
items that
la,
allow me
la
to
propuesta.
join the
Y
dots and
entonces yo
understand the
abogo
general
siempre
framework.
para la
So
mayor claridad
I
posible.
always say that we
Sobre
should be
lo
as
justo
clear as
concreto podemos
possible.
ir construyendo o
So
pasando
from the
un
specific
discurso más amplio. Pero,
items, we
o
can
sea,
build
por
a
ejemplo,
larger
hago
picture.
siempre mucho hincapié. Cada uno
And
de
I
esos
always
puntos,
say this, in each
transfórmalo en
of
un
these
ejemplo. Un ejemplo
items,
muy
turn
concreto.
them into a
Y eso
specific example, each point.
me servirá a
And that
entender
will
mejor
help
lo que
me
estás
better
hablando.
understand what you're talking about.
Entonces, por ejemplo, en lugar de hablar de flujo de servicio
Okay,
ecosistémico,
instead of
decir el
talking about
agua que se
ecosystem
utiliza para
service
producir
flow, I can
campos,
say that the water used to produce
Exactamente,
whatever
exactamente. O sea,
is, I don't know
el
what.
punto uno.
Yes,
¿Cuál es
yes, for
esto?
instance,
Me ha
key point
costado
one.
entender cuál es
Actually, I found it
tema
hard to
paraguas, ¿no? El
understand
tema
the
común.
umbrella topic.
¿Qué es lo que quieres
including the 5 points. I haven't understood what you want to express. Which is the topic? The economy depends on and has an impact on nature. I try to include the conceptual framework, the flows, and the fact that everything that happens in the economy then seeps into the natural system. And this system, through its ecological process, provides benefits for the economy and the society. Remember the triangle thing we saw earlier? What you're explaining to me now is the base of the triangle. But what I need to know now is the top. Talk to me about the specific case, the problem, and then you can explain and tell me about the flow, the economy, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay, I should talk about, I don't know, water scarcity in a given region. Yes, how water scarcity in Puebla, for instance, affects the entire Mexican economy. And that I understand. And from then, with this specific example, we can see how this happens, causes, consequences, context, etc. But at least I've understood the issue. The problem needs to be mentioned at the beginning. And also selection is very important as well. Sometimes when we want to write about something, we have a lot of information. And we think that all the information has the same level of importance. But writing is very similar to cartography. And this is something that Morges knew well. You cannot draw a map on a 1:1 scale. Maps are symbolic, of course. They're reduced because they need to include the main elements so that we can find our way. The same happens with culture. You cannot tell everything at the same level. You need to detect the significant elements, and from them, you develop the rest so the reader can find their way. It's like a map of thoughts. If we have a 1:1 map, this would be like a natural size map, and it's impossible to follow it. But if we write a text, that should be like a guide so that the person can start understanding the topic. And that would be our aim. Have I been clear, Daniel? I've used a metaphor, which is something that I encourage you to do. Metaphors, examples, similes. And I'll tell you about the rest in a minute, and I'll tell you why those resources are important. Any other lists? I would like to know if the rest of you have done the exercise. I think it's very useful because we can dissect your lists so that we can see how this works. Anyone else who would like to volunteer? I don't want to torture you, but we can have a look at this later on. In any case, thank you so much, Daniel and Daniela, because your cases have been very clear. We have Katrina. Okay.
Sorry, do you mind if I speak in English?
Okay.
No, that's okay, but please speak a bit louder.
Oh, okay, hold on, let me adjust. Is that better?
I'll try to follow you. You're a bit low, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm going to put mine in the chat as well.
Oh, sí.
I am looking at AI. I'm interested in the harms of AI, and so I just came up with heaps of harm. My computer's asking me what language I'm speaking. Okay, so I came up with heaps of harm. So the first one is hegemonic. So structural realities like data flows, surveillance, subscription-based economics, and neo-colonial exploitation of AI implementation reinforce power asymmetries that accrue in favor of the hegemonic status quo. The second is environmental. Resource-intensive AI, like the overuse of electricity and fresh water, threatens the environment's ability to sustain life. Economic, AI reduces human job opportunities and infringes on human-created IP. Psychological, AI limits human agency and capacity, e.g. over-reliance on ChatGPT. And social, AI reduces human interaction, like overuse of bots and automation.
¿Te importa si contesto en español?
Is it okay if I answer in Spanish?
It's fine.
Me parece un muy buen ejemplo lo que has hecho.
I think this is a great example because you have defined 5 key points around your thesis. We need to be careful because each point could actually be an article in itself. So we need to try and strike a balance between the different components. But I think that what you've done is very useful because at a glance, we clearly understand which are the key points that you want to address, which is the consequences or problems that AI might cause. So I think this is a great foundation around which you can structure your op-ed. You know, it would be something like the main risks of AI. We might summarize this because it's huge as a topic, but I think it's a very good example.
Thank you.
Además, en cada de esos puntos se le puede añadir lo que hemos visto.
In each point, we can add the data, the sources, comparisons, how people are interacting about this around the world, the synchronous and side of things. This is a topic I really like, so I don't want to get carried away. It's something we're addressing quite a lot in Latinoamérica 21. So as Brian has
a la redacción de Latinoamérica 21 para una posible publicación,
topic,
pues estaremos encantados de
and you want to write something that might potentially be published on Latinoamérica 21, please let us know. Anyone else who would like to share their key points? I do have a question. Now that you talk about speech, it's clear that this workshop is about writing, but I think that what you said was very interesting, this whole neural coupling.
Que sí, que de lo que nos dijiste se transfiere, en tu opinión, a la comunicación verbal, precisamente
from what you have said, what also applies to oral storytelling?
Perdón, no he entendido cuál era la pregunta.
Sorry, can you please ask that again? Yes. Yes. From what you have said at the beginning, what can be directly transferred to oral communication, and which things are different?
Del inicio era un poco darle contexto del por qué es importante.
At the beginning, I told you about why it's important to think about stories. There is something in common which I think is the most important thing, and it has to do with the human side of things. Why does this affect me? Why? Because we're interested in reading stories about people that have done something, or understanding that if this happened to someone else, it might happen to me. So this human side is essential. Clearly, in this workshop, we are focusing on this as if we're a mechanic toolkit. There are so many screws, screwdrivers, etc., wrenches, and you might use some tools more or less, depending on the context. So the full toolbox is what you were saying, like, I don't know, neural coupling. And to actually live those stories, we need to use certain tools. And now we are seeing which are the most useful tools. Hopefully I've answered your question.
O sea, quiere decir que son las mismas herramientas.
Okay, so you mean that it's the same tools
escrita como verbal
for written and oral communication? And yes, when I say verbal in Spanish, I mean, you mean oral? Yes, sharing a story, spoken storytelling. Okay, now I understand. Because we usually communicate what we want to say in writing at L21. When I said pitch, sorry, not speech, pitch, I was thinking about the pitch sent to editors before writing a story. But clearly, spoken language has similarities. When you're telling the story to a friend or to an audience, some elements work as well. If you're going to share the results of your research and you start with the methodology, blah, 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 your audience will not listen to you in all likelihood. But if you start with a story, telling a specific case, explaining why you were there, how you got there, what happened, as if it were a story, then it's more likely that the audience will be able to follow you and stay and pay attention. English-speaking people are great at doing this, much more than Latin American people. We need to acknowledge that.
Naftali, veo tu mano levantada.
Naftali has something to say. Let's have a look at your list. And after that, we can go on. We have time. This workshop might be shorter than an hour and a half, but go ahead, Naftali, please.
Hi. So my topic of interest is risk communication is necessary for building climate resilience in Caribbean small island developing states. So my points are: 1, Caribbean small island developing states are extremely vulnerable due to their location and development patterns. 2, hydrometeorological hazards can impact vital sectors such as agriculture and tourism. 3, a person's awareness of hazards and access to information influences their vulnerability to hazards. 4, risk communication is most effective when considering different audiences. And 3, risk communication is essential and can vary before, during, and after hazards.
Bien, yo veo, digamos, es un ejemplo muy parecido al de...
Great. I think this example is very similar to Katrina's, because the 5 key points are very clear, but you need to be aware of this not getting huge. Maybe you're being too ambitious in an article of this kind. In a scientific dissemination paper, you try to choose 1 or 2 key points, and then you mention the others. But in general, I think it's a good way. You organize this content effectively.
Thank you.
Si pudiese añadir algo más, como le
If
decía,
I may add something, as I was telling Daniel, I would try to be even more specific, something more tangible. That's what I would change.
Angelo, solo para cerrar esa idea, o sea, yo con lo que me quedé, lo que me dijiste es que hay que evitar las abstracciones, ¿no? O sea,
we need to avoid being abstract. Yes, abstraction is the kryptonite of attention. Wow. Wow. Okay, if you agree, let's continue with the workshop and let's have a look at the 2 items we have left.
Bien, ahora vamos a ver, lo ven, ¿no? ¿Verdad? Sí, estamos otra vez.
Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. The last 2 modules, 10 tricks to write an attractive or appealing text. So These are not Moses' commandments, but these are elements that we can consider once we already have a beginning. Okay, we have the beginning, the structure, we have identified the key points we want to address. We have understood how to address our points. So these are 10 techniques so that the language in the text, or the text in general, is more accessible. First of all, and this is very important, I will say this again and again, the most appealing thing about a text is for the text to tell a human story. We need a main character, a human, like a specific person, or it can even be a specific community. It's someone I can feel identified with, someone that I might feel close to, so that I can better understand the reasons and all that. I always say this first because it's the most important thing. If there are no human main characters, it's very difficult to catch the reader's attention in scientific dissemination pieces. And forgive me for this, but I was a child. I grew watching BBC animal documentaries by Attenborough. And they are edited and built in such a way that it's human, clearly. Some people might object to this style, but I think that these documentaries are so huge because they bring nature to you as if these animals were human. Of course, there's a whole philosophical debate about humanizing wild animals or animals in general, etc. We all have our opinions. But BBC animal documentaries have been so successful for sure because they are built as if they were a human story, as if the main characters were human. That was number one. Number two, do not write long sentences. Each paragraph needs to include one idea, two tops, but I would say one. Of course, try not to write as if this was a WhatsApp message or Telegram. Have a look at this example by Gary Provost in a book called 100 Ways to Improve Your Writing. It's a great book. It's easy to read. So, and here you can find ideas about how to write more effectively. This sentence has 5 sentences. Here, 5 words. Here there are 5 more words. It's okay to write sentences like this, but many of them together sound monotonous. Listening to what's happening, the reading becomes boring. The sound begins to buzz. It's like a broken record. The ear needs more variety. Now listen, I'm changing the length of the sentence and I'm creating music, etc. So this is a great book. It's a very easy book to read that will show you how to write. And this is a kryptonite thing I was just telling you about, number 3. I try and be careful. I'm saying do not overuse. It's impossible to avoid abstractions or abstraction. And some abstractions are useful and important, and it's okay to use them. But you should try to be as concrete as possible. Yes, you can use metaphors, similes, examples, comparisons. And the kryptonite thing might be useful, for instance. Why? Because it helps you easily understand something with one idea, one concept. And this should be our aim. For instance, Stephen Hawking, in A Brief History of Time, uses the expression example 62 times. 450 times the word how, and 105 direct questions. Questions are also very useful within a text because they're useful to help the reader take a break, breathe in and out and then keep reading. Or maybe call people's attention after several statements. So direct questions are very useful to do this. Saying 16.838 million people does not aid understanding, but saying twice the New York population, that helps. So whatever equals twice the population of New York. I've never been to New York. I'm dying to go. It's one of my dreams. I've bought the tickets twice, and for several reasons I have been able to use them. But I've seen so many films, read books, magazines, whatever. I've never been there, but I can still imagine in a way how many people live there, even if I don't know exactly. And that really helps. But it's very difficult for me to imagine such a huge figure, 16,000 million, it's impossible. Regarding comparisons, how I look at this interesting example. This is a New York Times cartoonist or illustrator, Mona Chalabi. In 2023, she won the Pulitzer Prize for these illustrations that showed how rich Jeff Bezos was. Some years have gone by, and I'm sure that Bezos is now richer than before. But this is very interesting because it explains huge figures. So these are billions of dollars by providing specific examples taken from our daily lives that put things in perspective. This is really nice. When I send you the PDF file, have a look at this because it's really good. Because there's a link, you can have a look at it, and it's really good. These are different illustrations that show us how rich Jeff Bezos is. So we shouldn't use abstractions, huge paragraphs, and we shouldn't use long words. The longer a word, the harder it is to read and understand, in particular if there are shorter synonyms. If there are shorter synonyms, I would say those are preferable. Regarding style, try not to use negative words. It's better to write in a positive way. Sometimes it happens with, I don't know, reject, block. You might get two negatives, and it's better to avoid that because it makes understanding harder. There is an element that every writer needs or does, which is using noun plus adjective. For instance, in an environment marked by transformation and opportunities, and also uncertainties and new risks, blah, blah, blah. Transformation and opportunities, let's choose one of them. And we will be including both concepts. And the same goes for uncertainties and new risks. It's better to use one, and the reader will understand this. You might have two words, but that won't necessarily help readers. One is enough, and we will make the text more agile. Another thing that is very easy to do, but it still happens a lot, and this is overusing percentages. For instance, 66% is the same as saying 2 out of 3. And 2 out of 3 is much easier to understand. It's much easier to understand a bit over half than 54.2. Unless, of course, you really need to include the exact percentage to the decimal, because that actually makes a clear difference. But if not, if we're trying to get people to understand a general concept, saying over half is enough.
Después, hay una cosa que a mí en particular me pasaba cuando iba a la escuela.
Something that happened to me when I went to school. I remember that teachers say that when we write, we should avoid repeating the subject. And that has stuck with me until university, until the time I started writing journalistic papers, because I realized that it was the opposite. Sometimes it actually helps to repeat the subject so that people do not lose the train of thought. So don't worry about this. Of course, if you're writing the subject 3 times in 2 sentences, that's a bit too much. But if we mention the subject in paragraph 1 and we need to repeat the subject in paragraph 2, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. And it will, you will be helping readers.
Después, exactamente, es mejor no utilizar terminología.
It's better not to use specific terminology. In particular, if there is a regular use synonym. Have a look at this example. Common salt. Some people think that saying sodium chloride or using the chemical formula to say salt makes it more accurate. And no, that's not the case. In this kind of text, it makes understanding harder. And also, readers are not usually dumb. They know that you're using sodium chloride instead of saying salt. Well, you can be using salt. So the readers might get mad at you and they will stop reading. So let us not get our readers mad at us. A general comment. To write well or effectively, it's not necessary to write in a complicated way. And as Alma said before, when you have a text, you've written something, put it to the test. 2 tests. First of all, read it to yourselves out loud. Why? Because as our pulmonary capacity is limited, sometimes we will find it difficult to read something. We will be out of breath. So maybe when we cannot read any more out loud, there's an issue for us to solve. We need to separate sentences or whatever. That's one test. The other test, before you send it to the editor or publisher or whoever, get it read by a close relative that is not a specialist, that likes other things. Ask them to read the text and ask them, have you understood the text? You can also ask them if they've liked it, but that's something different. But most of all, have you understood the text? Because sometimes we live in this echo chamber, and what we write, the words we use from our environment and all that, they feel obvious to us, but they're not. So please share with someone who is not a specialist in the topic, and that will allow us to better understand if the text is understandable or not. Because the text needs to be catchy, but it needs to be understandable. It needs to be worth reading. It needs to be worth the time you're using to read it. And finally, there's another difficult stage, and Alma talked about this as well. How should we close the dissemination or op-ed text? Well, we also have some techniques or tricks that can be useful when it comes to facilitating our work. So closing a text is as difficult as starting it. But over time, I'm now realizing that it's almost as difficult. I think the beginning is actually the really difficult stage. But this doesn't mean that the closing is not important. It is as important as the beginning, because the final sentence needs to contain the entire text as if it were the pillar, because it's the last bit the reader is reading. It's what will stay with them. from all the text. When you had a good closing, then you have a better quality text, and readers want this conclusion. And if they don't get it, they get mad as well. When you go to the cinema, you love the film, and the ending is horrible. Okay, what are you taking away? The good film or the horrible ending? You will remember the ending because we want a nice ending. We want something to close all the arguments that have been provided in this written or oral storytelling. Okay, some tricks or basic mechanisms. You can use a famous quote. This might be a bit harder in science, but this does help a lot. In particular, if we don't have many ideas, but we know that someone has talked about this and they have said something really worth quoting, and that makes sense of all this. What's the risk? Well, we might use a platitude or something like that, and we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't use cliches if they affect our text negatively. If you have interviewed someone for your research article and they have said something truly valuable and relevant, then we should consider it to use it for the end of art. We could also include a warning. In Katrina's example about the risks of AI development, you might include a warning at the end. If we do not consider these risks or the above risks, and if there is no will to face all this, then this might be harmful. This disruptive technology might be harmful for humans. I'm just, coming up with things now, but something like that. Example, governments and all those who during the pandemic say they defend life should help build this eco-social paradigm shift. Because if capitalism is a death destination, nature, on the opposite, is our main source of life. Looking after life, eco-social crisis, and the future horizon. We can also use a summarized idea, a concept, a definition that summarizes the sense of the text. This is an example, but you can read it later on because I want to have time for you to participate. Another way to do this is going back to the beginning. We were talking about Santiago Nazar, Garcia Marquez. If we're talking about our Santiago, our main character at the beginning, this is the human main character in our story, and we have identified him, included him in a context, a setting, etc. We can use this same person to close the story, and this would be a closed circle. Well, so this is the end of my presentation. I want to devote 5 minutes or whatever we need to questions. I would like to know if you want me to explain something, if you want us to talk about something else. Please let me know. Also, if you find these things useful, that you think you will be able to implement when you're writing a dissemination text.
No sé si Kim, tú también, no sé si quieres.
Maybe you would like to say something as well.
I'm happy to jump in. I think that this presentation it was very, very helpful and Angela, you do such a good job of establishing the framework, sharing your experience. And I appreciate the questions and the participation of Daniel, Daniela, Naphtali, Katrina. Thank you so much. Daniel's question about how this applies to oral storytelling actually made me think about a presentation I have to give next week, and I'm already like, oh, what's my hook? How do I break down my key messages? So this is very helpful. I would add, perhaps in conclusion, as we try and bring everything together, that this presentation that Angelo gave today, together with what Alma presented last week, is the information that you need and now have to go to work in your science diplomacy groups. And we will be back with Alma and Angelo on the 12th of March, which is the next office hours session. They will be there in the session and available to you to review perhaps an outline or even a document that you have prepared in relation to your science diplomacy group work. And so that is not too far away. And this is sort of on purpose because we're pushing everyone to have their projects completed by the end of April. And so if we use this time now that we have the foundation through these seminars and these presentations, and we can continue to count on the support of Alma and Angelo in helping you and your groups fine-tune your group work, that will help push the process along. Angelo, perhaps I wanted you to explain a little bit about what is Latinoamérica 21.
Sí, nosotros a lo largo de estos años hemos colaborado
Throughout the years, we have collaborated with the IAI, and we are now publishing a number of articles about biodiversity that will be part of a compilation to be published between April and May. And these articles have gone through the editing and analysis stage, as the one we have just shared with you, and we are posting them on our website. We now have, I think it's volume 12 or 13. That's how they are created. Someone proposes a topic, and the articles are written around that idea, trying to make this information available to non-specialists. Thank you so much, Kim, for your question, because this year we're so happy because the articles that have been published have been republished in several media. It's over 7 media outlets on average. So each article published on L21 has been republished by at least 7 other media outlets in the region. And this is a huge achievement. And it also speaks of the interest shown by media outlets in general in this type of content. And they wouldn't be able to access this type of content through a regular scientific paper. So, of course, I invite you to try to think about your text. Remember that at most, this article should include 1,000 words, 1,100 words, and try to see if you can write it using the elements we have talked about. If you want to email it to me beforehand, we can discuss it, we can have a look at it. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much, Angelo. So I will be asking for Angelo's presentation. He might have it in English. If he doesn't, I will translate it into English and share with everyone along with the recording of today's session. And then I'm going to be working with Alma and Angelo on some templates for you to help with the opinion article and the evidence note, so there's some even more structure and help for those of you doing your work. So we'll see everyone on the 12th of March. It's an optional it's not mandatory, but for those that can join. And if not, as Angelo just suggested, feel free to email questions or rough drafts to us at any point.
Absolutamente, encantado de recibir vuestra propuesta
Yes,
y
of
de
course. I'll
hablarlo,
be
como os
happy to
digo,
get your
si después vemos
text
que
or
es un tema que es
proposal
de
and we
interés
can
y
discuss it.
podemos
If this is a topic that is of
tiene
interest to us
unas
and
líneas
that
editoriales
has
sólidas,
or
asegurémonos de que
follows
lo
a
tenga,
solid
podemos
editorial
hablarlo,
line,
hablamos
which I'm
sobre
sure will
lo
be the
que
case,
decidimos
we
y
can
ver
talk about a
qué hacemos.
potential publication on L21 and our media outlet organization.
Angelo, una pregunta.
Angelo,
Bueno, a ver, es que son varias
one
cosas.
more question, or several things
Digamos,
actually.
esta posibilidad
This
digamos, de divulgar algo a través de L21
possibility of disseminating
o sea,
something through
tiene que ser una
L21.
historia que venga de un
It should
artículo
be
científico,
a
es decir,
story
que se pueda
coming
presentar,
from a scientific paper,
pero también puede
like
venir
a
de otras
case study,
historias
or
que
could it
nosotros
come from
identifiquemos
other stories
más
that
como
we
desde un punto de
might
vista periodístico, es más o
identify
menos lo que te estoy
as
entendiendo, o cómo
journalists?
lo...
Sí, a
Oh,
nosotros nos interesan los
well,
temas, los
we're
buenos
interested in
temas.
topics. We're
Si tienen
interested
un
in good
tema
topics.
por el
If you
cual
have
hayan
a
escrito
topic
un paper científico, o
that
porque
you have
conocen
written a
mucho el
scientific paper
argumento, o
about,
porque pueden
or
hacer
maybe you know the topic really
proponer una
well,
perspectiva
or
interesante
maybe you can
sobre algo que puede
provide or
interesar,
share an
siempre tienen que
interesting
pensar claramente
perspective.
que el
You need to
público
think
es
that
Latinoamérica,
the
que puede
public,
interesar
the
al
audience is
público
Latin
ibérico,
America. Think about
desde México a
a
Argentina,
diverse
desde
Latin
Chile
American audience,
al
Mexico,
Caribe,
Chile,
pues
the
encantado.
Caribbean.
No tiene que ser macro
Yeah,
todo, pero
it
sí
doesn't have to
después
be
a
a
la hora de
macro
escribirlo
topic,
es
but
donde
when
hemos
you
visto, ¿no?
write
Mejor
it,
empezar
that's
por
what
un
we have
caso
seen. It's
concreto, por
better
una
to
situación
start from
concreta,
a
por un problema
specific
muy específico
case, a
o por un
specific
tema que sea
problem,
muy fácil de
or a
identificar,
topic
¿no?
that is
Y a partir de
really
ahí,
easy
pues
to
podemos ir
identify.
viendo.
And from
Por
that,
ejemplo, yo
we
sé
see how
que
we go
otros,
on. For
Sheeder.net, por
instance,
ejemplo,
I know
que es
that
otra publicación de artículos científicos,
Sheeted.net,
ellos
they publish
sí que encargan
scientific papers as well.
siempre
What
parten
they
de la
do,
base de un
they
paper, de una
always start
investigación,
from
digamos,
a
pero
research
ellos
study,
hacen un método de
always.
trabajo parecido al
But it's
nuestro,
a
pero no
different kind
igual.
of job,
Y nosotros,
work.
digamos, no
It's
requerimos
similar
que
to
haya
ours,
un
but it's not
paper
the
sobre el
same.
cual basarse.
We do not
Sí, tiene que tener,
require a
específicamente,
foundational
un autor
scientific paper.
científico, ¿no?
What you
Una
do
base
need
sólida.
is to have a
A
solid
partir de ahí,
scientific foundation. But
the
that's
sky
it.
is the limit.
The sky is the limit.
Listo, gracias. Sí, bueno, justamente el ejemplo que traje es de un estudio que ojalá podamos publicar
The
pronto
example I
en una revista
shared comes
científica.
from a
Entonces,
study that we want to publish
lo
on a
quería
scientific
justamente
journal
tener las
soon.
ideas porque
So I
un poco
wanted
la idea es
to have
justamente
these ideas clear
cómo divulgar
because
algo como esto
I
en
was
el
thinking about
contexto de
how we can
Guatemala,
disseminate this
Claro.
in a
por lo que
context
el caso
like
también de Guatemala,
the
de
one in
plaza pública, en fin,
Guatemala
entonces me da
and all
otras pautas
that.
para irme
So what you have
ir
taught us
pensando en eso.
today really
Ya
helps me to
platicaremos.
consider all this.
Vale.
So I'll
Pero por un
contact
lado,
you
ojo,
later on.
también quiero dar
Great.
otra...
Also,
No tiene que ser un argumento demasiado amplio, pero tampoco que sea
it
demasiado
shouldn't be a broad
concreto,
topic, but
porque
it
si
shouldn't
no
be
va a ser muy
excessively
difícil,
specific.
digamos, despertar el
Because if it
interés
is, it will be
sobre
very
algo muy
difficult
concreto de un país muy
to
concreto
get
a
people's
autores
attention
teóricos de
about
la región
something very
o a
specific
personas
about
que
a very
quizás no
specific
están
country or
interesadas
issue.
en ese
Maybe
punto concreto
your
de
reader is
la
not
investigación. Tiene que
interested in
tener de
that
alguna
very,
manera
very
un
specific
interés
topic.
general, ¿no?
There needs to be some
No sé
sort
si
of
me explico.
general interest,
Sí, sí, claro.
if I make myself clear. Yes.
Thank you, Angelo. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Lourdes, for interpreting for us. I want to finish by saying, we're pushing you to write, and we know that everyone has experience writing. This is getting you outside of your comfort zone even more. And I think it's beyond just, seeing this as a requirement of the program or checking the box for your work in your groups. This is to push you to have a voice with decision makers or to have a voice with the general public and to get science out there. And these are important skills and tools that we encourage you to have, not just within the STEP space, but within the work that you're doing in your countries. We know that there is a lot of noise as Angelo started his presentation right now. It is hard to get people's attention. We also know that there is a big danger of misinformation out there. So the more we can get voices like yours out there that is grounded in fact, grounded in research, and focusing on solutions, this will help. We hope, we believe, we have to believe, right, Angelo and Alma, that it will help balance the discourse and the discussion that's out there in the public. So thank you for your important work and for sharing your knowledge with us, Angelo. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Seguro que sí. Muchas gracias a todos y me disculparán, un gracias especial a Lourdes.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Lourdes, because I always forget that I speak so fast and it's very difficult for an interpreter to work with me. Thank you.
She did a great job. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week. See you soon.
Ciao.